Why do we so often find ourselves drawn to the very people who end up hurting us? Why does love sometimes feel more like a wound than a gift? These aren't accidents. Carl Jung believed that our unconscious mind plays an enormous role in who we are attracted to, often far beyond our conscious awareness. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That idea lies at the heart of the emotional traps we call love. Let's explore the first psychological reason. You're attracted to what's familiar, not what's healthy. The unconscious doesn't seek out joy or even peace. It seeks what it knows. If you were raised in an environment where love was inconsistent, where affection came with conditions, or where emotional neglect was normal, your nervous system encoded that dynamic as love. It became your blueprint. Now, even if you consciously want something different, your body still feels strangely at home around people who recreate that old pain. This is why stable, kind love can feel boring or fake. Your system doesn't recognize it as love. It's not chaos. It's not danger. So it must not be real. But that's not truth. That's trauma in disguise. The second reason, you unconsciously seek to resolve unfinished emotional business from childhood. Jung believed that unresolved experiences from our formative years form complexes, emotional knots that continue influencing our adult lives. For example, if your emotional needs were ignored by a parent, part of you may still be seeking their attention. Not literally, but symbolically. You're drawn to partners who resemble that parent's emotional style, hoping this time you'll finally be loved the way you always needed. But that rarely happens. Instead, the cycle repeats and the wound deepens. And it's not love, it's repetition compulsion. Your unconscious is trying to rewrite history to fix what couldn't be fixed. But healing doesn't happen by reenacting the pain. It happens by recognizing the pattern and stepping outside of it. The third reason is perhaps the most uncomfortable. You confuse intensity with intimacy. In relationships with emotionally unavailable or even hurtful people, there's often a cycle of highs and lows, affection followed by withdrawal, kindness followed by criticism. These emotional spikes trigger adrenaline and dopamine, the same neurochemicals released in addictive behavior. This creates a bond, but it's not rooted in love, it's rooted in survival. And many mistake that intensity for depth. If someone makes your heart race, leaves you guessing, disappears and then returns with grand gestures, it can feel like passion. But Jung would ask, is this person mirroring your soul or activating your shadow? And that leads us to perhaps the most Jungian concept of all, projection. We don't see people as they are. We see them as we are, or as we once needed someone to be. When we fall in love, especially deeply and suddenly, it's often because we've projected parts of ourselves, parts we've disowned or lost, onto the other person. Jung wrote extensively about how we unconsciously cast our inner world onto others. We project our ideal image of love, of wholeness, of healing, and for a while, it seems like we've finally found the one. But then reality sets in. The mask falls, and we see the real person, not our fantasy. That moment can feel like betrayal, but really it's awakening. The person didn't change. The projection faded. And if we're not ready to see that, we'll move on to the next person, and the next, always chasing our own reflection in someone else's eyes. All of these patterns have one thing in common. They are unconscious. That's what makes them powerful. That's what makes them dangerous. But that also means once they are made conscious, they begin to lose their grip. Jung believed the purpose of suffering was not to punish, but to awaken. Pain is not the enemy, blindness is. If you can begin to trace the threads of why you're drawn to pain, if you can see the hands beneath the surface pulling the strings, then you can begin to reclaim your power. We think attraction is a mystery, but more often than not, it's a mirror. It shows us what inside us is still unfinished, still hurting, still unresolved. And when you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for wanting the wrong people. You start understanding the message in the madness. Love is not supposed to hurt, it's supposed to heal. But if pain is all you've known, love will have to unteach you first. If we want to understand why we're drawn to people who hurt us, we have to ask a deeper question. What do we believe we deserve? This brings us to the fifth psychological reason: low self-worth masquerading as loyalty. Many people stay in painful relationships not because they're blind, but because somewhere deep down they believe this is all they're worthy of. If you grew up feeling unseen, unheard, or emotionally invalidated, those wounds don't just vanish, they settle into your self-perception. They whisper that your needs are too much, that your voice doesn't matter, that love must be earned through sacrifice. So when someone mistreats you, part of you rationalizes it. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I was too sensitive. And over time, pain becomes familiar, and loyalty to that pain becomes confused with love. But Jung taught that real love cannot exist without the full presence of the self. And that includes your boundaries, your voice, your needs. If you have to disappear in order to be loved, that's not love, that's self-abandonment. Reason 6 cuts even deeper. You fear being alone more than being mistreated. This is one of the most powerful, unconscious drivers of toxic attraction. Loneliness doesn't just mean being without people. It can trigger an existential terror, especially for those with abandonment wounds. If being alone feels like emotional death, then any connection, even a harmful one, becomes a form of survival. You might say you want peace, but if peace feels like emptiness, like silence that echoes too loudly, then chaos becomes your comfort. You chase connection not for love, but for relief from that internal vacuum. Jung might say that you haven't yet made peace with your own inner world, and until you do, the outer world will always reflect your unrest. In fact, many people confuse connection with distraction. This is the 7th reason. You use relationships to avoid facing yourself. It's uncomfortable to sit alone with your thoughts, to feel what you've buried, to listen to the parts of yourself you've ignored for years. But when you're constantly entangled in someone else's drama, their mood swings, their validation, their chaos, you don't have to face your own. The pain they cause becomes louder than the pain you carry, and that noise becomes a shield. Jung spoke of the shadow, the disowned self, and warned that until we face it, we will project it onto others. Toxic relationships are often the battlefield where we fight our own shadow, projected onto someone else's body. We think we're battling them, but really we're avoiding us. And perhaps the most haunting reason of all, the 8th, you mistake suffering for depth. For some, love that flows easily doesn't feel real. There's no fire, no dramatic push and pull, no need to chase, to prove, to win. And without that struggle, love feels flat, too simple to be meaningful. But this is not love speaking. This is unresolved trauma romanticizing the battlefield. The part of you that equates chaos with passion, the part that learned early on that love was something you earn by enduring. And when someone comes along who loves gently, who stays, who listens, who sees you, it feels foreign, suspicious, even boring. Jung would call this a defense mechanism of the ego, resisting that which feels unfamiliar, even when it's good for us. Because growth is threatening, healing is disorienting, and peace, if you've never known it, can feel like danger. This confusion is where so many people stay stuck. They interpret trauma bonding as connection. They confuse emotional intensity with compatibility. And worst of all, they believe this pattern is love. But what it really is a loop created by unconscious memories, reinforced by emotional survival strategies, and left unchecked by the parts of us that are too afraid to see the truth. But here's the paradox Jung points us toward. What feels painful is not the relationship itself, it's the reflection, the way another person mirrors our internal fragmentation. Every time someone withdraws their affection and you feel that spiral of panic, that's a younger version of you asking to be held. Every time you feel addicted to their approval, that's your inner child trying to rewrite an old rejection. When love hurts, it's often because the parts of us we've rejected are being activated, not by cruelty, but by exposure. So the first step to breaking this cycle isn't to find better people. It's to meet yourself with more honesty, to sit with your loneliness instead of numbing it, to feel your old pain instead of projecting it, to say, I am no longer willing to suffer in the name of love. I am no longer willing to abandon myself just to feel chosen. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And to do that, to really do that, you have to stop chasing people who reflect your past and start becoming someone who protects your future. At this point, we've uncovered the invisible roots of painful attraction, but knowing why something happens isn't the same as changing it. Awareness is the beginning, not the solution. The question is, what now? If we understand that we're drawn to people who hurt us because of old wounds, unconscious patterns, and internal fragmentation, how do we begin to heal? Jung didn't believe in quick fixes. He believed in integration, the lifelong process of becoming whole. And to break this cycle of destructive attraction, we must begin not by looking outward, but inward. Because the truth is, we don't attract what we want. We attract what we are, not at the surface, but in the deep waters of our psyche. The first step is to stop romanticizing pain. Many people confuse suffering with significance. If it hurts, they think it must be meaningful. But pain is not proof of depth. Peace is not the enemy of passion. You do not need to earn love through endurance. Real love, Jung would argue, begins only when the self is present, not a version of you adapted to please, to survive, or to perform. You must ask, who am I when I'm not chasing validation? When I'm not trying to be chosen? The second step is radical self-honesty. Most people don't want to admit that they're addicted to the highs and lows of unstable love, that they crave people who are unpredictable, unavailable, or emotionally dangerous. But healing begins with truth. You have to be willing to look at your own role, not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power. If you're always falling for the same type of person, the pattern isn't out there. It's in you. And the moment you can say, this feels familiar because it is, and I no longer choose it, something shifts. Jung believed we must make the unconscious conscious. And to do that, you have to meet your shadow, the parts of yourself you've suppressed, your anger, your neediness, your shame, your grief. These are not flaws, these are fragments. And when you reject them, you stay fragmented. But when you integrate them, when you say, I see you, you belong too, you start to become whole. This is especially important in love, because until you meet yourself fully, you'll keep searching for someone else to complete you. That search will never end, because no one else can give you what you're not willing to give yourself. If you want respect, begin by respecting your own time, your own heart. If you want loyalty, stop betraying your own needs to make someone else stay. If you want deep connection, connect with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Many people think healing means feeling better, But healing, Jung said, often begins by feeling worse, by confronting the pain you've buried, by sitting in silence long enough to hear the voices you've silenced. It's not glamorous, it doesn't look good on social media, but it's real, and it's necessary. You won't break the cycle by hoping someone new treats you better. You'll break it by becoming someone who no longer tolerates being treated worse. Someone who doesn't confuse intensity with love. Someone who can sit with loneliness without collapsing into it. Someone who knows that wholeness doesn't come from being completed. It comes from being integrated. Jung taught that the goal of life is individuation, becoming the person you were always meant to be before the world told you who to become. And that journey starts by seeing how much of your love life has been shaped by unconscious scripts, and then choosing to rewrite them. That doesn't mean closing your heart. It means refining it. It means learning to love with open eyes, not through the fog of projection. To see people clearly and still choose with intention, not out of emptiness, not out of compulsion, not out of unresolved trauma. Love, when it's healthy, doesn't hurt. It challenges, it expands, it reveals, but it doesn't destroy. If it costs you your peace, your dignity, your sense of self, it's not love. It's a lesson, and once you learn it, you don't have to repeat it. The people we're drawn to are mirrors. They show us our wounds, our desires, our shadow. But once the mirror is seen, it loses its power. You no longer chase the pain. You listen to it. You no longer seek completion. You embody it. And you no longer ask, why do they hurt me? But rather, why did I believe I deserved it? And from there, a new kind of love becomes possible. One rooted in truth, not fantasy. One where your nervous system doesn't have to brace for impact. One where safety doesn't feel like boredom. And presence, real presence, becomes the most magnetic thing of all, because the more whole you become, the less you crave what breaks you. And that, Jung would say, is the beginning of true love, the love that starts with you.